I think we're live. Hey audience, hi everyone. Am I audible? Can you hear me? Put your comments in the comment section below so that we can know that you can hear us. Wherever you are, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, drop us your comments. Think we are live. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool. Perfect. Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Sorry for the delay. Things happen every time, but yes. Cool. So I think it's a wonderful day because I have a very interesting guest with me today. No, I'll introduce him in a while. First of all, let me welcome you. On this session. This is our next episode of Conversations with CodeChef, where we are inviting industry leaders from technology industry who are leading organizations, maybe at in different sectors. Today, I have a person who is leading one of the hottest sectors on today's date, which is e-commerce plus health tech. Okay, a lot of you might have heard about 1mg or might be using 1mg. A few of them might be kind of regular users too. So 1mg, to kind of introduce it, it's one of the fastest growing, and I think it's the largest e-commerce platform for delivery of medicines in India. Talking about their CTO and co-founder Gaurav, he hails from a computer science background. It is BTech from IIT, and then went on to lead some wonderful organizations. He has also led a couple of really massive games that you might have played in the past. I think I'll let Gaurav introduce himself. Welcome Gaurav to the show. I think a lot of the people there might already know you, but if you can introduce yourself, that will be great.
Hey, thank you, Mudit, for having me, and also the CodeChef community for having me and giving me a warm welcome. Introduction-wise, yeah, very simple. So I was born and brought up in Kanpur. Uh, Went to IIT Delhi, studied computer science. So it's a lottery, as you all know. And then I was very fortunate that when I graduated, I had an offer from the Bay Area. So I really wanted to get some experience working in what everyone rightly calls the tech mecca. So from 2001 to 2014, I worked in the Bay Area, mostly did product and tech. I think again, I was very fortunate that ended up doing something at IIT, which I have stuck with and loved throughout. Worked with product technology. Initially, worked in enterprise. So I used to write operating system code when I started out, and then wanted to do something much faster paced. And again, got very fortunate that I landed up with a job at Zynga. At Zynga, I ran engineering for their largest game, Farmville, and one of the largest studios, and then eventually ended up running that game as a general manager. 2014, I moved back to India, then joined my friends Prashant and Sameer at HealthCart as their chief technology officer. And in 2015, Prashant and I co-founded 1mg. So at 1mg, I look at technology and then increasingly more and more of the business side stuff as well around growth, etc. as well. So yeah, that's my brief background.
Okay, thanks for the intro, Gaurav. I'm tempted to, for the sake of audience benefit, if you can talk about what does growth actually imply, because it is something that has, come up lately, and a
Yeah,
lot of audience members might not know what it is. So if you can introduce
yeah,
that.
yeah. No, that's a great question. I'm also trying to figure out. So I'm not sure if my thoughts will be that great, but growth was actually exemplified if you go back by the Facebook guys, right? And if you go to YouTube and you search for, great growth lectures, then you'll probably see, I forget the name of the person, but you'll see a lecture from Facebook, and they talked about how they realized that they can grow the platform by actually getting people who join Facebook a certain number of friends, right? Now, what has happened in the last few years is that in India, as companies have gotten bigger, our rate of growth hasn't really slowed down. So 1mg, when we started out and we were 50, 100 orders a day, we were still growing 100%, 150% year on year. And today we are doing 1 million orders. We are still growing or aiming to grow 100% year on year. Now, I don't think it was any easier then, and I don't think it is any harder today. It's just that the scale of growth and the number of channels that you have available to yourself has changed. Now, going back again, what growth meant when we were very small, I think growth meant actually utilizing your marketing channels really well. If you did better digital marketing, if you spent more money, you could grow. But today it has become very, very complicated because the number of channels that you can go after online is not just, let's say, Google ads, but it's also social and TikTok. It's also YouTube. You have OTT platforms like YouTube and Hotstar and Sony Live and other channels. You have offline growth as well, because consumers are no longer just online, but also offline. How do you start to convert people from offline to online? You also talk about brand partnerships. How can we connect with, let's say, every company? So why can't we have partnerships with, let's say, food online food providers, and say that, hey, people want to eat healthy food as well. How do we make sure that their healthcare needs are serviced, let's say, diagnostics and testing, etc., through partnerships and platforms? So it's a very holistic view, which aims to answer very simple questions on the surface. How do you get more users? And once you get those users, how do you get to retain those users? But I think that's the bane in every company's existence, is that how do you acquire more and potentially at a faster rate? And how do you keep the users that you acquire in the face of constant competition that you see in the market, right? So that's what growth is. And increasingly, I think growth is becoming such a multi-skill, what's the right word for it? Multi-departmental challenge, that it's no longer about marketing. It's as much about customer experience, customer support, design, communication, branding, marketing, ops, product, technology, that everything has to play together, right? So that's very exciting, actually.
Okay, nice. So I mean, that's an interesting way to, it is, as you rightly mentioned in the beginning, right? Answering this particular question is it's a bit complicated one, but yes,
Yeah,
I mean, uh, just wanted to understand this, but you came from a tech background, and now
yeah,
growth is, as you mentioned, it's it's an interdepartmental or cross-functional
yeah,
thing. The
yeah,
problem statement is kind of one-liner. How do we achieve our key metrics? How do we continue to
yeah,
grow? Yeah, but
yeah,
then it becomes a lot more complex in implementation. So
yeah,
how do you think an engineering background relates to this field of growth? Because a lot of people who are
yeah,
engineers are really performing well in the field of growth marketing and growth as a whole. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think I've often gone back and asked that question of myself, that why is it that, see, if you look at it, engineering, we tend to make too much of an engineering background, but engineering is nothing but basically giving you a set of skills, right? You're potentially good at some math and sciences, which means you're analytical, right? More and more businesses today and business needs today have increasing analytical needs from a person, right? So being able to look at data, being able to look at insights of that data, being able to understand that, what are lagging indicators, what are leading indicators, what's the correlation between, let's say, metrics, what could I change so that I could, let's say, move one metric that I want to move in a different matter altogether, in a different direction altogether. So I think an engineering degree actually gives you a very, very good background in sort of answering those questions. That's one. I think the second thing that your experience typically does, especially engineering and product experience, and I think any reasonable experience also does, is that it, on top of that foundation that you build with let's say math, statistics, and science, you build a structured problem solving as well, right? So when someone asks you this question, that how do I grow faster, right? It's a very nebulous question. You don't know how to proceed. What are the next steps? Aage kaise badhe? But then you step back and you say, okay, if I was given this problem, right, how would I break this problem? And what you do is you basically start with a mind map of sorts. Ki, what are all the things that can give me growth? What is the one thing that I can change? So for instance, if I could double my month-on-month retention, right, then my growth automatically increases, right? What are the channels that I could go if I consider? So to give you an example, uh, that at one point we looked at all of our channels and we said, if we compare all our channels, then is the quality of users acquired through all those channels the same, or is there a difference? And as you would imagine, we found that the quality of users acquired through each channel is actually very different, right? Some channels naturally give users with higher retention and lifetime value characteristics. Some channels don't, right? So out, okay, how do I improve channels which are poor? and how do I double down on channels which are very good. So a lot of this engineering degree is actually forcing this, what's the right word, the scientific rigor, right? Forcing you to ask the right questions. And then once you ask the right questions and you get the data, then actually giving you the tools that you can understand how to make sense of that data as well, right? So that's I think what I would say is, why does an engineering background relate to growth?
Okay, great. So I think like you have mentioned, you've related computer science technology with analytical skills at the crux of it, and
Yeah,
the massive impact that it has by looking at complicated problem statements in a holistic manner. So
yeah,
I think this is what actually is the crux of what we encourage at CodeChef as well. Competitive coding is all about algorithms, way to solve problems and all. I'll start taking up questions that the audience has put up while
yeah.
registering for this particular contest, for this particular session. Sorry. So the first question is from Tushar. He says, "How do you zero on the tech stack to start with in a company?"
Yeah, that's a very tough question, man. And I will, rather than answer your question, I'll tell you about all the mistakes that we have made, right? So we started with Java very early on as 1MG's technology stack, and then we felt, oh, microservices. This is back in 2015. We felt microservices and Python is the right way to go. So we picked Python microservices, except the mistake that we made was we built our own, and it was very early. So we wanted to pick async IO as the core of our messaging, inter-service messaging platform. So we basically built our own messaging stack using async IO library, and then spent the next 3 years realizing that we built something which was not open source, which didn't have a lot of contributors, and it took a lot of time and energy investment to actually keep it up to date and keep it performing so that people could write fast code in it. 2 years then we said, okay, we got to do something which is more, which has better adoption, more penetrated. We ended up picking Ruby on Rails at the time, only to realize that now we have a real problem because the company has two technology stacks, one which is Python, one Ruby on Rails. And how do we decide, which microservice is built in which stack, and which engineer do we hire more? And we could never hire enough. If we had more Ruby on Rails, and somehow Python was at a loss, and the Python engineers were like, "Are you trying to get rid of Python?" And if we had more Python, then the ROI engineers were like, so and then we start to wonder about, okay, what about React? And look, so there is no right or wrong stack. Okay, let me just answer that question in a very, very blunt fashion. You have to pick the right technology for the tool, and compared to what it used to be maybe 20 years ago, where there was, let's say, a C and a C++, today you have a plethora of technology. Java is great, Python is great, so is probably Ruby on Rails as well. The way to pick a technology stack, I think, would be to first figure out, what is how mature are the tools that are available in, let's say, the open source community for supporting the language that you want to go with. If you pick a language that is too new or too esoteric, then what may happen? So I'll give you an example. 1 year we picked Angular, and we were on Angular 1. In 1.5 years, Angular came out with Angular 2, which had nothing in common with Angular 1. And we basically had to abandon Angular. And it was a massive amount of rework effort. So don't pick something which is very, very early stage unless your problem requires it. Make sure that you evaluate the quality of the tools and their maturity that exists to help you, let's say, pick that language. I think one of the other very important things that you have to pick is the quality of talent that's available. So if you pick something which is esoteric, which is, let's say, older, you may not see a lot of talent in the market for that. So be very careful. So for instance, with Ruby on Rails and Gurgaon, it's actually tough to find enough quality talent, right? So these are just minor things to keep in mind. But other than that, most of the technologies actually are fairly good for most of the problems that you can look to solve.
Okay, yeah, thanks. This was going to be my follow-up question. Like when you started
Yeah.
using ROR, did you find developers for that? How easy or tough was that?
I bought after. So actually, initially it was easier, but what has happened is that and again, I don't want to start any religious wars, because when you talk about a language, either positively or negatively, a lot of people get offended. But it's a fact that getting ROR skill set is actually a tough problem, especially in the NCR area, which is where 1MG is located. So, so we are, of course, because we have significant investment in Ruby on Rails, we have to figure out how to keep that going, and we have our own process for that. But I think in Bangalore it's easier to pick up ROR. But if you can compare it with, let's say, something like a Java or Python, then much more easy compared to an ROR as a skill set. Similarly, for front end, I think React is so much easier to find today than, let's say, any of the other competing front end technologies.
Right. Yeah, precisely. Okay. So as we're taking more and more questions, I would urge the audience to keep on, putting in the questions on the comment section. I can see, a lot of people are putting it. That's great. Our team is monitoring it. Let me acknowledge them, while we are having this discussion. So I have Sukanya, Shaili, Shotali in the back end, who are making me, who are helping me in running this particular show. So thanks a ton to them. Yes. So, and for our audience, if you want to see more of our content, it's the standard, it's like a very standard procedure. You got to subscribe to the channel. Okay, so that you keep seeing such content. Now I'll take the second question that we received. Uh, so Dheeraj asked this particular thing, like once you are done with, starting with your basic tech stack, how do you keep yourself updated, with the latest technology? When you also have to manage a massive team, a massive company. So how do you do that?
Yeah, it's impossible. Okay, and I think that one of the things that I've realized after many years of doing this is that every company and every CTO is very different, right? So there are some of us who are, let's say, very still architecturally and design wise involved. There are some who are less, and I would say that with the growth problems, etc., I've become less and less involved. And what I and technology is also broad, right? So you can look at technology in the sense that, hey, there's a new programming language like Go, or there's new container technology that's coming out. How do you keep track of that, and how do you bring it in, right? I feel that for us and for 1MG, it's very important to understand what the broad contours of technology are, rather than what the core, let's say, specifications are. So to give you an example, 5 years back when we wanted to start a data science team, right? Then in general, as a country, we didn't have enough of it going on, especially in healthcare, right? If you look at what do we want to do in healthcare, nobody really had the kind of data that we had. Nobody really had, kind of problems that we could be solving with our data together, right? If people had, let's say, some algorithm that they would know, then they would be like, it's a train because there's no data. So there, a lot of time was spent in actually understanding what is the state of the art. And the way I kept in touch with technology was that what I typically do is that I find one area that I want to learn about. So for instance, with data science, that was one area I wanted to learn about. And what I did was that basically I would connect with the team and we would read papers together, right? So we would go find most of the data science journals, and we would find the top papers of that year, and we basically go read those papers. And when we found a topic, for instance, in natural language processing, for instance, when we found that this is very interesting, then we would go all the way back to the 1970s and read some of the starting papers then, right? That how is it that natural language processing started? How did they initially start with, matrices, and then eventually went to, let's say, neural network models. And now we are talking about bidirectional encoders, decoders, and transformers, etc., right? Which is the latest thing. And what we did differently was that we focused as much on the model and the libraries as we did on the math and the science behind it, right? So understanding what was the math behind it, how did it work, how did these functions work, how did they, let's say, do what was the statistical models behind it, etc. So typically that's what I do, where it's very hard for me to keep track of everything. But then I have a team, right? I have a team which basically keeps track of a lot of things. And then I keep in touch with them to understand that what are the pros and cons of doing something. So today, for instance, we are in the process of evaluating yet another Python framework for ourselves, right? And what I've done after a lot of discussion with the team is to help them understand how are we going to evaluate such a framework. And the rules are the same, right? It should be mature enough. It should have a large community that is supporting it, right? Not just one MG that is using it. It should have a sizable number of companies, or a reasonable number of companies that are using it. It should be in active development, right? When we bring it in, what are the metrics that we're going to look at from a performance, etc. standpoint? And once those are put in place, then we start to test out those models. You do the same with, let's say, progressive web applications. So when we did progressive web applications, I spent some time with the folks at Google who were kind enough to help me understand, and some amount of time with folks at other companies who were using similar technologies. And then you go in and understand, okay, how do we actually bring that into the 1MG framework? Same is true with Kubernetes. What are the pros and cons? So I think net what I'm trying to say, it's hard, but you have to make time explicitly. And typically I can make time for one thing in a quarter at max, that then we figure out how to bring it in.
Okay, so you have this particular goal that at least one thing that you have to explore in a particular quarter, or it's more of a
Yeah,
desire that you want to fulfill.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay, okay, nice, cool. So I want to take the next question. It's around this one particular thing. Like, it's often said that behind great success stories, there are great failure stories as well. So Darshan has asked this particular question: what kept you motivated through your journey? Because 1MG is killing it. Mine's even your previous game literally was a massive success in the market. So how did you keep yourself motivated through your journey across, like, over the years? If you can share that with the audience.
Uh, how did you keep yourself motivated? I think there's a few aspects. One is, when we started healthcare, it became very clear very early on. Uh, what was motivating about Zynga, I think, was the human psychology, right? The fact that people were interacting with a digital game, buying digital goods, connecting with their friends, sending them requests, etc. It was just fascinating, right? Why would anybody do that? And what is the motivation? And you start to learn that people have this inherent need to connect with other people, whether they are friends or not, and you realize that actually in developed societies, loneliness is a real problem, right? Fast forward to 1MG, I think the fortunate part of healthcare is that if you do anything, then the impact is huge. And I'll tell you that the kind of stories that we've heard about 1MG, they're just mind blowing. I don't think there can be any bigger reward. There was this Quora thread that was shared with us many years back, where someone asked, what is, let's say, one application that has changed your life? And there was someone sitting in a village who actually chose to wrote about 1MG. And I'm being very candid. I had not even heard that answer before it actually hit like 1 million views or something. This person said that their parents were poor. They spent 50% of their income actually in chronic diseases for the family, for the parents, and also I think for grandparents. And through 1MG, they basically found substitutes. And through these substitutes, they were able to bring their bills down. And there are stories like this, and there are tons of stories like this where in COVID crisis, people who are sick, our team has helped them find hospital beds, find them medicines, find them proper information. During COVID, again, our team did a phenomenal job of getting, removing misinformation around COVID. So we prepared these things called information booklets, which were these detailed look into COVID and how it spreads and how can you take care of yourself. And some of these booklets were actually co-opted by state governments, by the central governments, and they were used, of course, okay, without attribution. They were used by them to actually let their teams know. And we got messages from board companies that, this is one of the largest companies in India, and our board actually talked about this booklet and said it is so useful. So a large part of what kept us motivated was that we were making real difference, and it's like, when you're an ant in water, look how that beach डूबने के बीच में you keep finding these leaves and straws, and you grasp onto them and you hold on to them. So these impact stories are like that, and some of it is, look, to be very honest, just real doggedness, right? You're like, okay, uh, I have to make an impact. I'm going to keep doing this, and I'm going to keep finding things that are going to keep it motivating. So the team helps a lot. We work together. There's positive, there's negative, and you just take it in your stride and move on. So you use co-founder community as a support. You find support, man. You find support. If you're making an impact, you find support, and you keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, I mean, 1MG has, like, I don't know about others, it has played a very important role in my life during the pandemic. I must say this. When a delivery of, when going outside was daunting in itself, how can we go and purchase
Yep,
medicine?
yep,
1MG was there, so
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
yeah, I think that impact bit could be one of the biggest motivators. And as you mentioned, beyond that as well, being kind of persistent that karna impact aayega, we will get there, and then people
yeah,
keep on supporting, the ecosystem is there. So I think it's more about getting started, is what I understand from your journey that
yeah,
you have mentioned,
yeah.
and sticking to it.
Yeah, you have to find a problem that you're excited about, and if you're excited about a problem, then eventually you find reasons to stick with it.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. So the next question is, Atif is asking this particular thing. Why is online medicine industry still finding it difficult to win the consumer's trust? I mean, a decent portion of them might still be, wondering about this, risks and involved in online delivery and everything. And even though medicine is a forte where instant availability is of utmost importance, so why is still there a gap? And is there anything that you're doing through technology to address this? If you can answer.
Yeah, yeah, good question. So first of all, let me clarify one confusion. Actually, the online medicine industry is not finding it difficult to win consumers' trust. And um, actually, if you look at the online, let me give you some stats. Okay, so Indian retail pharma has around 1 million retail pharmacies. Okay, so one of the largest number of pharmacies anywhere in the world exist in India. Uh, Compared to the million retail pharmacies, the total organized retail pharmacy, which is just say Apollo as a chain or MedPlus as a chain, is less than 1% in terms of number of stores that exist in the country. Apollo has some, I think, 3,500 odd stores, etc. If you look at the e-pharmacy sector, it's probably already bigger combined together in just the last 3-4 years. It's probably one of the largest retail sector for online medicines in the country. So growing at a much faster pace than the offline retail consolidation, etc. In fact, we strongly believe that India may the offline consolidation will not happen, and we will jump straight to online consolidation, similar to what we've seen in e-commerce, etc. Okay. Now, the question that you may ask is, why is everyone not using it, right? And the reason everyone's not using it, and you've rightly pointed out that medicine is something that you need right away, right? When you have a headache or a fever, right? Or you've gone to a doctor, you need your medicines in the next 30 to 45 minutes. The challenge there is actually infrastructure, which is that India today or till today has not had such high density that makes logistics at a cost, at a reasonable cost possible for, let's say, 1 hour, 2 hour deliveries. And we've seen in the past that multiple players have tried to come and do, let's say, 90-minute deliveries, etc. The costs for those have been prohibitive, and most of them have actually either had to shut down the business altogether, or they've had to shut down the 90-minute delivery thing. So what has happened is that a large portion of, so we break medicines actually into two components, which is chronic and non-chronic. Chronic is where someone who has, let's say, diabetes, hypertension, and they need to take medicines month on month. Non-chronic or acute is your headache and your acidity and your fever medicines, etc. Their online pharmacies have not yet penetrated. But what has happened is that because in the last 4 or 5 years we have gotten scale with chronic, etc., we are now starting to experiment very aggressively with faster delivery. So, for instance, in Gurgaon and NCR today, we can actually fulfill most orders in 4 to 6 hours time. Soon we are going to launch 2 hour deliveries in cities like Gurgaon, Mumbai, Bangalore, etc., and probably get to a 1 hour delivery model as well. So it's happening. I don't think the issue is trust. In fact, I would say that the trust is much higher when it comes to online, because the supply chain is very, very tightly controlled, right? We buy directly with pharma companies. We have complete understanding of where a particular strip of medicine came from. And that also shows in customer surveys that we do. In every customer survey that we've done, people say that they trust online medicines much more, because of the supply chain guarantees, etc., that we can provide, and because we are larger vendors. The core challenge is, how do you get medicines in, let's say, 90 minutes to 120 minutes? Today, so far, that hasn't been the focus. The focus has been chronic patients, but soon more and more consumers will come into our purview because of faster deliveries, etc.
Okay. So you mentioned about, I mean, this is a definite, kind of a moat in the case of 1mg, that the number of vendors that you have would be very much larger than, other players out there. But then with increasing number of vendors, the complexities would increase. Gaurav is
Yeah.
asking a particular question, how do you ensure that suppliers won't supply fake medicines at this particular scale?
Yeah, good question. So let me give you some sense of the reality. Okay, so the reality in the country today is that, actually our medicines are not barcoded, which means that in general we have a challenge with the supply chain being kosher end to end, right? So from a manufacturer, from medicines leaving a manufacturer to ending, let's say, the supply chain, there is a general challenge in the ecosystem which actually no company independently can solve, right? And there the government is trying to do a lot of work with blockchain, etc., trying to make sure that that supply chain is traceable, trackable, and traceable. Now, what 1mg does is that, because we limit the number of partners we work with, and in a lot of cases we actually work directly with manufacturers. So what happens is that we have most of the medicines that end up in our supply chain come directly from the manufacturing entities themselves. And because everything is on the bill, right? Everything has a paper bill, which is then tracked in software, which has batch numbers, quantity, etc. The probability of any fake medicine coming is zero, right? Just like probability is never zero for anything and never 100%, it is as close to zero as you can get that to be. So that's how we maintain, our supply chain authenticity, and we are very, very particular about it.
Okay. While you say this, I think I'm just wondering if, actually this is kind of an advantage if you compare it over
Yeah,
offline. Like there, it could be a
huge
black box
advantage.
kind of thing. You don't know about the supply chain
Yeah,
and everything. But especially in your case, where you have the bandwidth to go and, work with
yeah, yeah.
the main players out there. And
Manufacturers, yeah, yeah.
okay,
Yeah, it's a huge advantage, huge advantage. And we track, like I said, because so we built over the years, we built our own software, etc., to actually do this tracking. Uh, the thing that we haven't done such a great job at is making this information available to the end consumer. That this is the journey of your medicine strip all the way from manufacturer to you, and that's something that we are working on in bits and pieces. But we track everything, and we built a lot of software over the years to actually track all of those things.
okay, nice. So did you start working with manufacturers just in the beginning, or it was something that
No,
came?
it came later on. It came later on, but it has now been there for the last 3-4 years.
Okay, nice. So the next question is around starting up, a business. So Sarthak asked this particular question, how to incorporate an idea into program, particularly, and it's slightly a larger question, but yes, particularly how to know if an idea is feasible. So if you can try to answer that, in a short span time.
Oh man, yeah. I don't know. I think product market fit is the biggest problem for any startup. I would be very, very candid with you. I think we got very lucky. When I joined HealthCart, 1mg was actually a small side project that Prashant had started. And what we found was that even though we weren't marketing money, etc., there were people who were downloading this app on their own and using it to find information. So we realized that there was a latent market need for a problem like that. And we got lucky. What we do now with when we have ideas, and I can give you an example. 1mg launched a subscription product a couple of years back. The initial idea for that subscription product started in 2016, even though we launched it in 2019. the idea started in 2016. I wasn't convinced that in medicine subscription there was a possibility of creating a subscription program, and if I created it, people would buy it. So I created a short presentation. I created a model as well. So it was like a full analytics model, which put in, okay, this would be the conversion, this would be the repeat rate, etc. This would make sense. And then what I did was that every interview that I did, I would ask interview candidates to basically solve that same problem. That, if people came to 1mg and if I wanted to create a subscription, would there be enough takers for that subscription or not? And so what happened was that over hundreds of interviews then, right, I could get a variety of different feedback on what would work, what won't work, and I could go back and basically hone that problem better. I spoke with a lot of stakeholders. We spoke with a lot of stakeholders in the market as well about whether something like this would work. We did hundreds of customer interviews asking them, what they value, what they don't, and eventually we came up with a blueprint, right? That this works, this may work, this may not work. When we came up with the blueprint, we did a minimum viable product. We tested it. We saw what the retention rates, etc., were. Once we were convinced that it was good to launch a product, we launched and scaled it. And now we are struggling with a different set of problem where we are like, how do we scale it further? How do we make it even better? And that has, started the journey all the way from scratch, where we take an idea, we talk to as many people as possible, stakeholders, doctors and nurses and physicians and customers, old customers, young customers, caregivers, patients, marketing guys. And, we try and piece that together. And over time, we get partial answers and then we validate them with customers and products.
Okay, nice. Thanks for answering this. Uh, okay, when I looked at it, I thought, okay, answering questions around product market fit in a in a session would be slightly difficult, given that it's a fairly difficult problem statement to kind of tackle in most of the cases. But
Yeah, I've simplified it. It is. I don't think. I think we work for a month and maybe get one small insight on what to do next, right? So it's a tough problem, man. It's a really tough problem.
yeah, right. Okay, so there are a lot of students who are watching this particular question. I want to take, this particular bit. You also mentioned about interviews that kind of gave me a nudge to pick that up. Okay, so when you interview candidates, let's say for fresh hiring or for, let's say, in an early career stage, like 0 to 3 years workings, what do you look at from a skill set viewpoint? And a lot of people have been asking these particular questions. Uh, Algorithmic capabilities are important, like why study data such as an algorithms, why log hours behind it? Is it something that is important to you as a recruiter?
I think it's a the answer to the question is very simple. That when someone graduates from a college, especially when you're a fresher, there's actually no other way to evaluate a candidate, right? So let's say people are graduating from multiple different colleges, right? There's actually no common ground to evaluate them, right? There's no GRE, GMAT score. And what you need is, so I'll give you an example. I don't do fresher interviews anymore. Again, I'm fortunate there's a team which does it, and I speak with candidates who are a little more senior. But back at Zynga, I was actually part of the executive recruitment committee for engineering, and I used to interview everyone. And basically, what you do is that the interviews are more about finding a common way to evaluate a broad variety of candidates than to really figure out who's good at what, etc. Right? So my interview questions used to be very simple. So my first question used to be that, can you reverse a string in place? If I give you a string, can you reverse it in place, right? You'd be surprised that despite engineering degrees, etc., 50% of the candidates actually would fail that question. My next question would be, can you reverse a sentence in place, right? Most of the guys are so familiar with string dot reverse, sentence dot whatever, x dot reverse, that they would not even know that there is a thing called an array where you can store different characters, and this is how you would, let's say, have a starting pointer and an end pointer, and this is how you would reverse them. And so you have to understand that most of the times the interviews are designed in a way to help people put you in a bucket, right? That of all the candidates that they have seen, where is it that you are in that bucket, right? That's first. The second is that there is really no way other than for engineers, other than data science and algorithms, to understand that A, can you solve problems, and B, can you put the right tools, right, to solve the right problems. So to give you another example, to candidates who could solve the string reversal, etc. problems, right? My interviews would go more complex, right? So they would, from here they would go to a scramble problem that I give you an m cross n grid of characters, and can you write a program that makes all possible valid words, right? Now, all possible and valid words are the keywords here, right? And what I would look for valid words is that if I gave you a text dictionary, can you build a try out of it, right? And then I would go into this question that what is the benefit of using a try? Most of the guys won't know that there's something called a dictionary data structure. And then there's a time complexity and a space complexity associated with it, or understand that all possible words is basically a graph traversal problem with its own time complexity, etc. And there are ways to optimize that as well. So there's a lot of data science, data structures and algorithms form the core of what we do in computer science. And I know that a lot of it has become very, very simple today, right? So for any problem, you can go and you can look at communities like CodeChef or Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow, and you can find answers. But even understanding what is the right question to ask and what is the right answer to use, right, means that you have to have some sense of what is applicable where, right? And this is where data structures and algorithms actually make a huge difference and are very important.
Yeah, thanks for this answer. I think it's a very, very clear and direct answer to look at. So I'll take this next question that Unnat has asked on YouTube. It's an interesting question. Building your own logistics is better, or using services of other logistic companies like Dunzo is better. What do you prefer? And
Yeah, again, we tend to look at questions and answers in black and white, right? Like, should you build your own? Should you use someone else? Unfortunately, in life, like in life as in business, there are no clear answers, right? When we started out, we were doing hyperlocal delivery for the most part. There was actually no Dunzo, nothing back then. Even today, in large cities where we have enough of a demand and enough of order density, actually our 1mg's logistics services does much better from a cost and time of delivery standpoint than, let's say, any of the third parties do. So it's always a mix. We do around 50-50. So in large cities where we have enough density, we do our own logistics. In smaller cities, we do third-party logistics, and we keep experimenting. So like with anything else, we keep experimenting. So if there's a new logistics service out there, like a Shadowfax, etc., then we'll work with them, right? We see, okay, we'll give you 5% load. Let's see what you can do. If you do better than us in terms of turnaround time, in terms of cost of operations, in terms of cost of delivery, then we will give you more. Otherwise, we are happy to do it ourselves. So no easy answers, but we need to do what is right for business. Right for business sometimes is to build our own. Right for business is sometimes to use a third party, and it keeps changing.
Yep, right. Agreed. And I think it would also depend on a bunch of factors, not just it's not a binary where we can say whether we have to
Not
do it.
binary.
Yeah.
Not binary. Not binary.
Yeah.
I'll give you an
So
example. What happens is that, so I'll give you another example. So when we were using third party, we found that in large cities, if they would get a spike, then we would get deprioritized in orders and the service quality would go down, right? And so we said, okay, this is not something that we can suffer in a large city. So we went back and said, we'll do less volume that we are okay suffering, let's say, quality issues on. And a lot of it is improving as logistics infrastructure in the country in general improves. A lot of these problems have gone away. So our share of third party versus our own has improved more towards the third party side. But it's non-binary, as you said.
yeah, right. So the next question is being asked on LinkedIn. The person is asking, what would you recommend an undergraduate student to definitely do during their college days? I mean, now let me kind of put it in the perspective of because it becomes slightly ambiguous. Let's say if someone who's looking to become an entrepreneur and comes from a tech background like you, so what would you recommend them to do during their UG days?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last part, but I think you asked what would be the recommendation if someone has a tech background and wants to do entrepreneurship, right? Look, man, I'm a little old now, so my views are very different. I think if I could go back to my undergrad days, I would have a lot more fun than I had. Okay, I would travel a lot more. I would see a lot more of the world. You cannot become an entrepreneur, just sitting in your shell. There's so many more things to do in life than just technology and entrepreneurship. And we all have reasonably long lives. So what I would say is that I think the two things that I would say that I would have done more of in my undergrad. One is that I would have spent more time discovering what is it that I liked and disliked. And I think in general during undergrad, let's be very honest, a lot of education and undergrad in India is just, follow the herd, cookie cutter, right? लोग computer पढ़ रहे हैं, हम भी पढ़ेंगे. लोग entrepreneur बन रहे हैं, हम भी बनेंगे, right? It's not clear if that's the right thing for you. In fact, someone called me the other day and they said, "Oh, my friends are doing this. What should I do?" And I was like, dude, that's your friend's life. Your life is different. So, if you, I'm not sure if you will like this answer because I'm sure you're looking for me to tell you some magical thing that you will do that will make your life more entrepreneurial. But no, I would tell you something which is very mundane. Experience more of life, figure out what matters to you and how and why. Maybe if you can go travel every summer that you have, see more of India, what it is all about, what are the challenges that people face in the day to day, right? If you want to do entrepreneurship, then you have to solve someone's challenge somewhere, no? And unless you go talk to people, meet people, how would you figure that out? So life is long, man. There's a lot of time for entrepreneurship. Go do something more, go do something different, right? I see so many people get out of college, start working, get burned out in 5 years. Have fun, enjoy yourself.
Yeah. Okay. I think that was a very candid answer and pretty honest one as well. I think uh, often, I mean, kind of answering this question is difficult. It becomes unfair to a section of people who have different kind of aspirations towards their careers, towards their sense
Yeah,
of purpose might be different.
yeah.
And yeah, it's great that you answered it with so much candidness. Okay, so I'll take this next question that has been asked by Arth. So he registered during the from our website, and he asked this particular question: how do big companies like 1mg manage their application or website or web app code? And then he goes on to ask which tool do you use in general.
Yeah, I think that itself is maybe a 1 hour long CodeChef session. And if I could bring in my front end guys, they could probably write a PhD dissertation on it. And over the years it changes. So when we started out, things were easy, but today we have so much code, so many applications across so many platforms. So we have mobile web, and we are trying to convert a lot of it to PWA. We have desktop, we have Android and iOS, and we are trying to figure out how more and more of our mobile web app actually gets reused in Android, iOS. So we're truly trying to get to multi-platform. Now, one of the core challenges that we discovered in multi-platform is no one platform has actually done phenomenally well in that area, right? So that's one challenge. Then the tool chain there is also a problem. So there's a ton of work that we have done starting from design. For the last year or so, we've been working on a design language system. And what we've said is that, if you look at the hierarchy of components, our vision is that whatever you see on the 1mg platform, right, is basically a set of components, hierarchical components with let's say a code library that supports all of it, right? So an engineer or a designer who wants to make a page or an application, right, can basically say these are the core components from the design language system that we have, and then can basically inherit the code along with tracking, etc., from this code library that we've set up. So that's what we've been working on for the last 1 year. We started with basically defining what are the core components of our application, what is the code that goes behind each of those core components. Now what we are doing is that we are combining the core components into what we call widgets. So these are more complex components which have multiple core components together with data, etc., and then code that supports them. And then post these components, we have post these widgets, we have these pages, and from these pages, then we have other multiple applications and other form factors as well. So there's a bunch of work that we do. Most of our code is now in React JS. We have our own, linting and minification and prettification tools that we use. We have our own we have our own test pipeline. So because SEO is very important, and a lot of times we actually in this front end web app thing, we actually often break Google's guidelines. We have a lot of linting tools in there now which actually catch the SEO guidelines before it gets shipped to production. And there's a continuous code that runs in every time you check in something. It will say, okay, this particular thing has been violated, so someone can go back and check that in. So there's a ton of work that we do, and we have a whole team that actually supports now that effort. And we are building like a full front end platform team as well, with a rotational mechanism to continuously evaluate and build more and more tools there. So very complicated, yeah, very complicated.
Yeah, of course. So I take this last question, second last, in fact, actually, what are the suggestions that you would give to a fresher who wants to be better at development? Because you mentioned about a bunch of technologies here. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And, I think the only way to get better at development, I think there's multiple aspects, right? One is that how do you write code that is clean, right? Clean, where if I look at code, and back when I used to write code, then there was a lot of focus on writing code in a way that someone could just read your code and understand what you're trying to do, right? Even without comments at times, right? How do you make sure? So there's a part of it which is nitty gritty, that are your variable names very well defined? Are you using them in the right fashion? Are you making sure that stuff is compact, there are functions, etc.? So we don't, again, in this whole mashup culture that we have today, where the cost of writing bad code. So I'll give you an example. When I used to write bad code, my operating system would crash. Okay, my operating system would crash, and we'd basically have what you guys would call the blue screen of death on Windows, right? And the file system would be corrupt, and it would spend 10 minutes actually doing a file system check and recovering the file system. So the cost of writing bad code was very, very high. And a lot of us became better developers because we were forced to write, better quality code, stuff which would have fewer bugs with unit testing, etc. So don't underestimate the importance of writing clean code, writing unit tests for your code, understanding what are the core principles of writing code. I think the second part is, how do you solve more and more complex problems? So if you're not getting that opportunity at work, then, and I'm sure most of you can, if you really strove for it, if you're not getting that opportunity, then find more and more complex applications that you can write by yourself. And because when you write complex applications, the kind of problems it would throw would be very, very different from just writing, a single function or a bunch of functions or a single file, so understanding that. So I would say that these two at a high level are what I would follow, is that, make sure you write clean code that can be understood independently, and then progressively find harder problems to solve, harder application problems to solve. And that's how you become a better developer. At some point you start to look at scale. So now some of the problems you cannot solve by yourself, right? Like, you're not going to sit by yourself and design a Twitter which would have millions of users and throw you, problems around scalability and consistency, etc. So some of it is just finding problems of scale, right? So you have to find companies that can give you these problems of scale. Companies like 1MG, which, let's say, have millions of users every month, or maybe other companies, right, that can give you these problems at scale.
Okay, yeah. I think that's that was my last question itself. what are the incentives for a programmer to join 1mg? Because
Yeah.
company, and that you kind of talked about a bunch of things that you demand while hiring people. What is that you are bringing to the table for some really good talent out?
Yeah, we like to keep things simple. And I missed some of your last points, but I think I understand the crux of the question. So we like to keep things simple. We've tried to build an organization. We've tried to build an organization which is very, very flat from a hierarchy standpoint. So one of the big reasons why uh, someone would want to consider 1mg is that there's no difference in the quality of work that, let's say, a fresher would get to do at 1mg versus, let's say, someone who is very, very experienced. Uh, if you have, let's say, the intent of doing work like that, so unlike if you go to a big company and for 6 months to a year you may not get to do anything meaningful, at 1mg you may be actually short on a key production application in your first week, maybe first month itself, right? So that's one thing. I think the second is that we are, in addition to flat hierarchy, we are also a very sort of initiative driven organization. So if there's anything that you want to do that you're passionate about, then we don't hold you back. So I'll give you an example. The stuff that we talked about from front end, which is the web app, the code, the PWA, the linting. Our front end engineers have 2 to 4 years experience, right? And we have these two people who have been with 1mg from the very start, who have built most of this infrastructure, and they routinely chat with folks at Google to talk about what they have done, and they actually get great accolades for it as well. That in some of the cases, the work that we are doing, no other company seems to be doing. Maybe because we are silly and we are so deep into that work. So I think the exposure is much higher for especially for someone who's a fresher. The exposure to problems is much higher. The exposure to business is a lot higher, right? If you ever want to do, let's say, be an entrepreneur, then at a company like 1mg, you interact directly with the product team. You interact directly with the business team. So we have a small team that is working on faster delivery. Right now, this team of engineers actually works directly with our logistics and operations business team to understand what are the customer expectations, how are they failing, what can you do better, and they come back and basically implement those solutions. So the exposure to business is a lot higher. I think that when it comes to health, if you're passionate about health, the kind of problems we are solving, I don't think anybody else is solving in health. So I think flat hierarchy, freedom, autonomy to do what you want to do, working on some of the cutting edge tools if you're interested in doing that, working with production systems, working directly with business and product. Those are some of the reasons why folks should consider 1mg.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I think that was a very, very strong proposition that you put across. I think from all the angles. So developers who are looking at the company now, they can go and check 1mg's career space. While wrapping the session, I must thank you for being with us
Thank
today.
you
I
so much.
must thank our really awesome, yeah, you're very welcome. And I must thank our really awesome audience who have been very so, and I apologize for some I think technical glitches at my end, but thank you everyone for being here. Do like, share, and subscribe if you like the content. And yeah, thank you everyone. Have a productive weekend ahead. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you
Bye.
so much, Madhu. Thank you. Bye.